Everyone, can I welcome you to the 19th meeting in 2012 of the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee, and can I remind everybody to turn off their mobile devices as they do impact on the broadcasting system. It can be quite annoying if they go off during committee. The first item of business is Draft Budget Scrutiny 2013-14. The committee will now take its final evidence on the draft budget from the Cabinet Secretary for Infrastructure, Investment and Cities. This will cover various aspects of the draft budget, including affordable housing, which has been the main focus of our committee's scrutiny, transport and other infrastructure. So can I welcome Nicola Sturgeon, first of all, to her new post, to her first appearance in front of the committee, the first of many, I hope. Congratulations, Cabinet Secretary. Supporting officials today are Rachel Gwyon, Head of Housing, Sustainability and Innovation Finance, Janet Egdell, Head of Infrastructure Investment Policy, and Sharon Fairweather, Director of Finance, Transport Scotland, all of the Scottish Government. So can I invite members to start questioning? Oh, Cabinet Secretary, do you wish to make a brief opening statement?
Very briefly, Convener, can I first of all thank you for the welcome and say how much I'm looking forward to working with this committee. I'm sure my officials will nudge me this morning if by sheer force of habit I slip into talking about the health budget instead of the one before us today. The committee knows that the 2013 draft budget confirms the spending plans for the portfolio that was previously set out in the spending review. You will also know, because you've just referred to the ministerial responsibilities that have changed, the portfolio that I now cover includes the budget for welfare reform and parliamentary business and government strategy, as well as the issues and subject areas that were covered by my predecessor. Also has responsibility for our cities strategy. Everybody knows that we're facing cuts to our capital budgets, and therefore a significant focus of the government is to look at ways in which we can boost our capital spending, and we're doing that in a variety of ways through, for example, our £2.5 billion pipeline of infrastructure projects being delivered through the NPD model. We are switching more than £700 million from resource budgets to support capital, and supporting a range of innovative financing initiatives like the National Housing Trust. Next year, we will continue to do everything we possibly can to focus portfolio expenditure on activities that will aid our economic recovery and stimulate growth. The investment in our physical infrastructure brings obvious immediate benefits to the economy, supporting employment in the construction sector and in its supply chains. You mentioned that housing had been a key focus, and we are very focused as government in trying to get our housing strategy right, building homes that are of a high quality while making a contribution to economic recovery. It's estimated that the £760 million investment in our affordable housing supply programme for the three-year period 2012-13 could generate around £3 billion of economic activity and support up to 8,000 jobs a year, directly and indirectly. Since the spending review, the budget in 2013-14 has increased by almost £40 million due to net effects of the allocation of Barnett consequentials and the reduction for acceleration of existing resources from 2013-14 into 2012-13 to aid recovery. Very briefly, also, Convener, on transport, our investment in transport infrastructure helped to create the best conditions for business success by creating a transport system that enhances productivity as well as connecting regions and people to economic opportunity. In 2011-12, 95% of Transport Scotland's £1.8 billion budget was invested back into the private sector, which supports over 25% of civil engineering contracts in Scotland and more than 12,000 jobs. And we want to see that sort of performance continue this year and into next year. We're also determined to use our transport budget to help in the transition to a low-carbon economy through investment in, for example, cycling initiatives and hybrid buses. We know that investment in cycling infrastructure can help on a number of fronts, gets us more physically active, as well as being an investment in our Commonwealth Games legacy. There are various other items that I know the committee will want to cover this morning, but housing and transport are obviously two key ones, and I'm happy now to answer questions on those as well as any other issue that the committee wishes to raise.
Thanks very much, Cabinet Secretary. Margaret, would you like to start the questioning this morning, please?
Good morning, Minister. The Government's 5-year plan to develop 30,000 additional affordable homes, i.e. approximately 6,000 per year, resulted in 6,800 completions in year 1. Why did the performance exceed the target?
I think I've read the evidence. I think some of the witnesses that you heard from councils and housing associations gave the answer to that question. Obviously, efficient use of resource, making sure, as is a key feature of our housing investment just now, that we are getting bangs for our bucks. Leverage, as we'll come on no doubt to talk a bit more about, is key to our housing investment just now. So we're, for every £3 we're investing, we're levering in £7. Obviously the completions in any 1 year will reflect also starts made in a previous year, and that has a factor in the final figures that you see. But I do think, while I don't underestimate, and nothing I will say to you today will underestimate the scale of the challenge we face in housing, given the economic conditions that we face and the feed through into our budget here. But I do take great heart from the overshooting of that target in year 1. That gives me confidence that if we continue to do the right things, then we'll meet that 5-year target. And I also note comments made by other players in the field who note that the £760 million investment over the spending review is sufficient to meet that target. It's a 30,000 target overall, but of course very important within that is the 20,000 that we're guaranteeing will be for social housing, with 5,000 specifically council houses.
Yeah. Going back to your comment that you says it included like double counting of approvals as opposed to completions. We had approvals in 1 year and then you've also got completions. I mean, you changed it from counting home approvals to home completions. Right?
Sorry, I didn't say, and I certainly didn't mean to imply that there was double counting. I was simply reflecting that houses started in 1 year will complete in the other. We can send the committee as much detail as it wants around the composition of that figure, but that is a legitimate, real figure that says that we outperformed our target for that year, which I think is good. It doesn't lead to any complacency on the part of me or anybody else. We've got a lot of work to do. Some of the issues I have no doubt that members will want to raise around subsidy levels, the views of housing associations about the sustainability of those. These are all challenges that we are very aware of and very open-eyed to, but that performance in year 1 gives us a very solid and very positive base to build on.
Yeah. If I go back, just a very quick question I want to ask about that as well. Can you tell me why the government moved from approvals to completions as a way of counting housing?
Well, I think the completion figure is, one that I think is an appropriate figure to because obviously it reflects houses built and houses available for people to buy or let, and I think that's an important figure. Do you want to say any more about the kind of different ways over the years that we've reported these things?
Yes, thank you. There were a couple of issues that stakeholders brought to us around the time of the credit crunch, which pointed to a very good rationale for moving. One was that the approval of the house isn't the same as it being available to a tenant in need, and because of planning and efficiency and procurement and all those things, there could be a many-year gap. And the aim of all of us was twofold. First, for the industry to keep economic growth happening and to ensure that there were jobs and build was happening pretty close from approval to completion. And the second was to ensure that the home was available to those on the waiting list who needed it. So the move was actually supported by those we spoke to as recognising that a home built is one that a tenant's ready to move into. A home approved doesn't give that certainty. It's actually a more challenging target as we go through the term of the Parliament. It's not a get out of jail free card by any sense of the imagination.
And my last question is probably to yourself, Rachel. Who was it you actually spoke to when you says those who we spoke to?
Before I ask Rachel to to answer the specific question you've asked. So can I mean, I'm not completely new to the housing brief. In my early days as a minister, housing was part of my broader health and wellbeing portfolio. And at that time, the kind of concerns that Rachel has articulated about counting approvals rather than completions were, very real. And the key point is that because a house is approved doesn't necessarily mean that house will be built. Therefore, it doesn't necessarily mean that that house will be delivering construction activity or supporting the economy, and therefore it doesn't mean that the house will be available as part of our overall housing supply. So I think the change is right in terms of it's measuring something that is more real for people. But as Rachel rightly says, it's a more challenging target and more challenging measure for government to meet, because you're actually being judged on the finished product. Not, I don't think it takes too much for people to realise that it's perhaps easier to approve a house than it is to build a house. So I think it's the right measure, and it's one we'll very openly and very transparently be judged on. Rachel, do you want to add anything?
Yes, thank you. The sort of stakeholders we were talking to throughout the time, this was 2 spending reviews ago that the discussion had started with them, a wide range who are members of the Housing Policy Advisory Group, for example, and that we were also talking to ahead of budget briefings, so from local authority and trusts councils through Alacho through to the Homes for Scotland. A wide range of people had discussions with us about the challenges of getting from approval to completion.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Malcolm?
I'd really like to start by asking about the transparency of the budget before asking a couple of specific questions about the housing budget. I mean, I suppose we have struggled really just because if we looked at the budget document, we got a figure obviously for what was planned for housing a year ago, and then we get a figure for what's planned for housing for next year. But as I'm sure you'll be pleased to tell us, there have been quite a lot of housing announcements in between, and I suppose it's a bit puzzling why you don't even refer to those in the document, because I think we've had to struggle to actually understand, what the total housing budget is for this year and how it compares with next year. So, I mean, firstly, I wonder why that wasn't covered in the document, but secondly, could you just clarify, I think there's been 3 tranches of announcements, if you could just briefly clarify what those were and where the money came from. I imagine a bit of it most of it possibly came from Barnett Consequentials. There may have been some money brought forward from future years. It would be helpful just to have some clarity now on what actually is the housing budget for this year, I suppose.
I mean, in terms of the transparency, I mean, I take that point. I mean, to some extent, it perhaps flows from a determination that I hope everybody would understand, that where we can access additional money, we deploy that money as effectively as we can and to support economic recovery as much as we can. So that's the reason behind that. I can understand that in scrutinising figures, a committee wants as much transparency as possible. Can I say from the government perspective, is if there's more we can do to lay those figures out for you as clearly as possible, I'm happy to do that, and your clerks can liaise with my officials around that. Obviously, there were changes to the housing budget in February this year, again in June this year, and when John Swinney made his budget statement in September, he announced additional changes which broke down to 30 million additional money for housing in this financial year, 12-13. I should say 7.5 million of that was loan funding, the rest straight capital funding, and in 2013-14 an additional £12.5 million to housing. Again, £7.5 million of that was loan funding. Changes that have been made to the 2012-13 budget, they will be followed through as is normal for in-year budgetary changes in the autumn budget revision, and that is the normal practice. And changes and additions in the 2013-14 are reflected in the draft budget. So, I'm happy to provide the committee, as I said at the outset, with any more clarity around the figures that it feels it needs. I should say it's a fairly happy position to be in, that I'm being asked to explain why the budget has increased from published figures. It would probably be a bit more difficult to explain the opposite.
I mean, I think it would actually be in the government's interest if you did have some narrative. We are dependent on the Spice briefing, which I have every reason to believe is reliable, of course. So the figures that we are being given in the Spice briefing now is that the result of the announcements during the course of the year is that the housing budget, the housing supply budget, that is 315 million this year and 219 million next year. And I suppose that leads to my next question, which is, I mean, I won't pursue the point about whether it's good to measure completions rather than starts, but I suppose it does, it seems to me that it possibly does lead to a problem with funding, because if you've got that, you've put that extra money into the housing budget for this year in particular, and yet we're now funding completions, and yet, well, we don't know what the completions for this year are, but you yourself said that completions will tend to reflect the starts made in the previous year or possibly the previous 2 years. I mean, there was a dip in starts in the year 2011-12, so I wouldn't kind of expect the figure for completions this year to be necessarily the 6,800 it was last year. So we've got that extra money, and yet, so I'm a bit puzzled, and this is, I just don't quite understand in that sense how the new funding system works. If you've earmarked that money for housing this year and it's spent on completions, I'm not quite sure how those two things necessarily add up, if you haven't got the number of completions, as it were, this year to require that money.
Well, the completions will be reflected in the figures for the year in which the houses are completed, obviously giving councils more money to spend on, to give money to housing associations to build houses, enables them to plan and to start more houses that will feed through into completions. I mean, I'll be perfectly frank about it. I would rather that our capital budget wasn't being cut to the extent that it is, and that we were putting in the kind of money that we have been able to through Barnett consequentials, that we'd been able to put that in from the start because we hadn't had a cut in our capital budget. But when you have a situation where you are trying to access as much money as possible, then that will lead to a situation where sometimes at fairly short notice additional money is being given for a specific purpose, in this case housing. I would reflect the fact, though, that the key players in the housing field warmly welcomed the additional resource, because it will allow more houses to be built, which is what we want to achieve.
No, well, I'm sure everybody welcomes the additional resource. I mean, I don't think anybody is questioning that in any way. Anyway, the result is that, as the Spice paper suggests, you could actually say that there's going to be a reduction of 96 million from this year's total sum and next year. So I suppose the questions that flow from that are you confident that the draft budget's capacity to meet the 6,000 target next year? And I suppose a related question might be to do with jobs, because obviously you highlighted the extra jobs that are coming from housing investment. And I think in the past you've said that the acceleration of 346 million of capital supported 6,350 jobs. So I suppose somebody might ask, what's the effect on jobs of the housing budget falling from 315 million to 219 million?
Well, I mean, you can look at this in various different ways, I suppose, and you can certainly look at it from that perspective and put that interpretation on it. But of course, you get to that conclusion purely by virtue of the fact that we have increased the housing budget in this year. Now, I'm going to make an obvious point here that, I will no doubt repeatedly make, is that we operate within a fixed capital budget, and that fixed capital budget is currently being cut by around a third. That has implications for the capital programmes of the Scottish Government. That said, as I said at the outset, we are determined to do everything we can to continue to maximise our capital investment. In terms of next year, I very much hope that common sense will prevail in George Osborne's autumn budget statement in a few weeks' time, and there will be a capital stimulus announced that will lead to capital consequentials for the Scottish Government, which, obviously if that happens, there will have to be government decisions about how that money is spent. But given our previous focus on housing, it would certainly be a candidate for additional resources. So we've set a budget that is within the maximum that we can do within the resources that are available to us. But if decisions are taken elsewhere that are, in my view, sensible decisions, then that, as this year's budget has changed, so too may next year's budget if additional resources become available.
Well, I'm sure we don't disagree about George Osborne, but do you think the 2013-14 draft budget will be sufficient to deliver 6,000 units?
Well, if I can look across the spending review, it's a comment I made in relation to the previous members' questions, is the £760 million that we are able to invest, as things stand right now, across the spending review. And remember, some of that, certainly in the case of Glasgow and Edinburgh, goes straight to local authorities. It's in the local authority budget line. That is, in our judgment, and in the judgment of some previous witnesses that you've heard from, sufficient to meet our 30,000 target. Now, that's not to say there will not be challenges in meeting that, because clearly that relies on the ability and the willingness of, for example, housing associations to continue to develop. So I'm not blind to the real challenges we face, but yes, I do consider that budget is sufficient, which is not to say that I wouldn't welcome more if more was available. But
last question, you'll also have heard from the housing associations, not least from your own city, that the 40,000 grant per house is not sustainable in the long run. I think you're right. The general view from witnesses was that probably with difficulty they might reach the target for the current period, but that in order to achieve these objectives, housing associations are having to use reserves which will not be there forever. And several housing associations have said that they just will not be able to sustain this rate of new build. So, I mean, you must have heard those comments from various housing associations. So, how would you respond to that concern?
Well, let me make a number of brief points. Firstly, the 40,000 is not a set in stone, immovable. There is flexibility there for innovation, for energy efficiency, for houses that are particularly hard to develop for particular parts of the country. So there is a flexibility around that. The other 2 points I would make are these. I said earlier on, I'm not completely new to the housing brief, and when I was first a minister with responsibility for housing, and we started to bear down on the subsidy levels by necessity so that we could continue to get the volume of housing out of the budgets we had available to us. We were told back then that this was unsustainable and that we would not be able to continue to see houses developed. That was proved not to be the case, and we have seen the rate of building continue. The last point I would make, though, is not to underestimate for a second the concerns of housing associations. I, as I'm sure all constituency members do, have got a very close relationship with housing associations in my constituency. One of the directors of one of my local housing associations was one of your witnesses in this session. So I hear absolutely these concerns, and it's true to say that while things may be sustainable a few years ago, as reserves get depleted, as borrowing conditions continue to be challenging, then that may not continue to be the case. So we require to have a very close, a very constructive relationship and dialogue with those in the house building sector in order that we are responding to those concerns as best we can. But my final point would be, I can't magic away the financial reality we face just now unless we are prepared to have that absolute determination to get as much as we can for the investment we have available. Then we won't deliver the houses we need to deliver either. So it's not easy, but we need to continue with this approach, but do so while listening to and responding as far as we can to the concerns of those that we rely on to build the houses.
Alex, a short supplementary.
I wanted to return just very briefly to the issue of approvals and completions and how we actually assess these numbers. We as a committee have to look at the budget and try and gauge whether the budget is being used effectively. And as such, using the budget as set and comparing that to the number of approvals is a fairly transparent way for us to assess that. Whereas using completions, we're in effect looking at a number of completions that relates to a budget some years ago perhaps, and that this year's budget can only be judged in terms of completion by outturns that happen 1 or 2 years into the future. So do you accept that the moving from approvals to completions actually makes the whole process a bit more opaque?
We never paid out money on the approval of houses. It was paid usually in stages, I think, up to and including completion. So it was never the case that when a house was approved, the budget then went out the door in response to that. So I think that's just an important point of clarification. That said, I do understand and this is not deliberate and it's not the intention on anybody's part. We've already had the discussion about the importance of measuring completions. I do understand, I suppose, the challenges that poses for a committee that's scrutinising a budget on a year-by-year basis. I'm happy, convener, to go away with my officials and look to see if in future there is a way in which we can present information to the committee. It may not be information that's on the face of the budget document, but supporting information to the committee that allows those lines, if you like, between the budget spend in 1 year and the completions of houses in 1 year, which may have been started in previous years, to be better understood. So I'm happy to look at that and come back to the committee with some suggestions that might assist your future scrutiny.
Okay, we've got a lot of questions to get through, so if members and replies could be as brief as possible. Adam, over to you.
Okay. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. Just following up on Malcolm Chisholm's points about concerns within the housing association sector, particularly about their financial capacity to continue to meet the targets. The target for the new affordable supply was originally premised on independent research led by Glenn Bramley on the long-term financial capacity of social landlords to deliver more affordable supply. 2 years on, what's your view of the financial capacity of the sector to deliver affordable housing supply, and to what level? And does this facilitate the long-term development of affordable housing, in your view?
As I've said earlier on, I think the targets we set remain achievable, and I'm of the view that they can be achieved, which is why they remain our targets. As I've said in response to previous questions, I don't underestimate the challenges we face in doing that. In terms of your question about the capacity of the sector, I mean that the capacity of different players in the sector will vary. Is the first part of the answer to that. The second part of the answer is that capacity it has and will continue to change, and that underlines the importance of the point I made about us having a close dialogue with housing associations in particular. It is obviously the case that if subsidy levels are lower, then housing associations require to fund more of every house through other sources, whether that's from reserves or greater levels of borrowing, and that affects the capacity on an ongoing basis. So it's not a fixed feature. It's something we need to continue to monitor to ensure that the targets we are setting are deliverable, not just in terms of the money we've committed to them. I mean, there's no point in us committing money to these targets if we don't have people that want to spend that money on building houses. So it's something we need to monitor very closely, and we do that to the very best of our ability and by talking to the sector collectively, but individual players within the sector on an ongoing basis. Do you want to add anything on that?
The only other thing I'd add is, of course, the ability of councils to look across at the needs for houses in their area and to work both with RSLs in their area and their own provision to provide houses means it's possible to look at a strategic view in each area that need is being met in the right places. So that as some housing associations might decide they wish to develop right now, and some might decide they wish to focus on services to their tenants right now and develop in a few years' time, it still means that overall in an area there's a chance for a strategic and spatial view of meeting need.
So does that mean that councils clearly have a greater financial capacity perhaps than housing associations that can borrow money cheaper through the Public Works Loans Board? So would you expect councils to see more social housing being built by councils as opposed to housing associations? Do you think the balance is shifting in terms of supply?
Housing associations remain, the principal supplier of affordable social housing. I mean, we have seen an increase in recent years, which I think is a very welcome development, of councils getting back into the house building game. You know, I figure I quote occasionally that not everybody likes to hear is that, you know, in the last 4 years of the last Labour administration, 6 council houses were built. You know, we've overturned that and turned that round dramatically, and we have a new generation of council house building. Obviously, councils have got access to a borrowing source that enables them to do that. So yes, we've seen that shift, but I don't anticipate that you know, the position of housing associations as the lead players in this will change. Of course, we've changed the way we you know, allocate the money to councils so that they can take a holistic view right across the piece, which is one of the points Rachel was indicating there, so that councils can take a strategic view of where the need is and what the best way within their area is of meeting that need.
Okay. And in terms, going back to the question of subsidy per unit, if what you're telling us here is you keep the situation constantly under review in terms of the financial capacity of the sector, does that mean that you could review the subsidy per unit if you're finding that there is a drag in the housing association sector in provision of housing?
There is flexibility within that system already, and I think it's important that there is, not just to take account of the fact that in any given year, you know, some developments will be more costly to develop than others. There will be particular circumstances. So it's important to have that flexibility. And yes, it's important that we are able to keep that overview. I think what it's only fair of me to say to the committee is that, you know, we are not in a position of being able to turn the clock back to the kind of subsidy levels that you would have seen when I was previously in charge of the housing portfolio. I mean, we would not be able to deliver the kind of numbers that we want to deliver if that was the case. So yes, there is flexibility, but I think it's flexibility that is the key word here, rather than any suggestion, which would not be fair to give anybody this impression that we're able to kind of go back the way to subsidy levels that are significantly higher than they are at the moment.
Is there anything else that can be provided to help the sector in terms of developing its financial capacity or expanding its financial capacity?
Yeah, I mean, Rachel's been very involved in some of this work. You know, we are encouraging, and again, I'm not sitting here saying any of this is simple or easy or without its difficulties, but we are very keen to encourage different sources of finance, you know, whether that's pension fund ideas or, you know, innovative ways of funding housing. Project Rachel was most involved in over its development was the National Housing Trust model, which there is now a version of that available for registered social landlords. But that was a scheme that allowed very relatively small amounts of government money used in the form of a guarantee rather than in the form of a subsidy to lever in significantly more amounts of money and deliver houses. So these innovative ways of levering in funding are definitely what we want to focus on, as well as continuing to talk to housing associations and others about the appropriate level of subsidy. I don't know if you want to say any more about the NHT.
Thank you.
Could I just add, supplementary to that, maybe you could answer, are there other models as well as the NHT that you're actively considering in terms of trying to boost the sector and the affordable housing supply?
Absolutely. I mean, this is an area of close work with housing associations and others on an ongoing basis. We've had a range of ideas through our previous innovation fund. We are looking at what we're calling HAG recycling, which is taking funds where RSLs dispose of properties and allowing those to be reinvested in provision of more homes in the future. There's already been an announcement earlier on this year of a scheme with Savills that was jointly done with Clyde Valley, and there's another few that we're looking at around bringing in pension funds and getting that leverage. And what that does is it frees up the budget that is there for the social housing provision and the council housing provision, so that the homes that are affordable, as in still below housing benefit levels, still accessible, are using this greater leverage. We're always happy as well if people bring us challenges like availability of finance or efficiencies in procurement, to look at how to help the sector as a whole to take costs out of that part of their model or free up access to finance so that they're enabled to keep developing.
Thank you.
Okay. Gordon?
Thanks, Convener. I want to move on to the subject of land supply. We know that private house builders and supermarkets have large land banks, and in rural areas ownership of land is held by a small number of landowners. What's your view on whether land supply is a constraint on the delivery of affordable homes where they're needed, both now and the immediate future?
That can be the case, and that's undoubtedly been a feature in the past and may well be again. I guess it's not, in my view, the biggest constraint at the moment. I think the biggest constraint in terms of house building at the moment is the general economic conditions, access to finance, which may be the reasons behind an owner of land banking that land as opposed to developing on that. So I think other factors are at the root of the challenges in the housing market just now, but the land issue is definitely one that, as I say, has been and no doubt will be a factor in future.
If you're saying it's a factor in the future, is the government looking at ways that we can tackle that issue, especially in rural areas?
Well, I think we would want to be, as we are, making sure that we've got the policies in place and, where appropriate, the funding in place to encourage appropriate development on land rather than have land sitting idle doing nothing. So through, whether it's our subsidy scheme, through some of the innovative financing work that we are doing, it is not particularly related to land, but it is sort of related. The changes that have recently gone through Parliament in terms of empty properties. Clearly, the focus for us is to look at how we direct policy to get appropriate development, because it's generally speaking in nobody's interest for that not to be happening, because it's the development that provides the economic construction activity and the homes at the end of the process.
Okay, thanks.
Margaret, did you want to come in this?
Yes, just a quick question on the land supply. There is a concern that due to extra costs for building homes on land that may be contaminated, or houses with special needs for wheelchair users, they may be restricted because of the extra costs. You said earlier on that you're flexible in your approach at looking at the cost for building. If housing associations you find that are not building on brownfield sites because of contamination and also for the extra cost for houses for wheelchair users, would you consider giving extra money towards the housing associations to ensure that the special amenity houses are actually being built for the individuals?
Yes is the short answer to that, and I'm mindful of the convener's warning earlier on about not having too lengthy answers. That's exactly the kind of factor that means we need flexibility in terms of subsidy levels, and it's exactly those kind of things that would lead to subsidy levels perhaps being determined at a different level to the benchmark level. We've also got separately to the housing investment programme the vacant and derelict land fund, which is money designed to help bring contaminated land back into use. So yes, the answer to your question, as I said earlier, is yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. If we move on to welfare reform, how do you see universal benefits, the housing benefit reform proposals impacting on the affordable housing supply?
I am very worried about the impact of welfare reform. I obviously have given evidence separately on the budget to the Welfare Reform Committee. I think there are various strands of the welfare reform agenda that are a cause for concern, both in terms of impact on vulnerable people, but specifically in terms of your question to the financial capacity of housing associations and the ability of housing associations to deliver. If I can perhaps just isolate the two strands of it that concern me most. One is the proposal to pay housing benefit direct to claimants as opposed to paying it direct to landlords. We've expressed concern to the DWP about that. I think that has implications for vulnerable people, but it also has implications for housing associations and their ability to develop if one of their principal sources of income is not seen to be as stable as it might have been previously. The second example I would isolate and highlight in particular is around the under-occupancy changes to housing benefit, where somebody who's deemed to be under-occupying their house will have a 14% or a 25% cut in their housing benefit. We will all have examples in our constituencies just now of people being affected by that. Obviously, that has an impact on the individuals concerned, but it has an impact on housing associations because they will be in the invidious position of having to rehouse people when, in the case of many housing associations, they do not have a ready supply of one-bedroom houses to put people into, or they will, have to take the hit themselves, or be in the really invidious position of looking to evict people who fall into rent arrears. So these are big changes with potentially frightening impacts, and I'm very concerned that the DWP either hasn't thought through these impacts properly or has thought them through and has decided to press ahead regardless.
So what, if anything, can the Scottish Government do to mitigate the impact of these reforms? I'm thinking of lessons that might be able to be learnt from Northern Ireland.
Well, the Northern Ireland example is a good example because Northern Ireland is different to Scotland in that it has devolved power over welfare already, so they have a leverage over these things that unfortunately we don't have just now. So Northern Ireland has been able to bring about alterations to the general proposals that would ameliorate some of this. We will certainly continue to argue that case with DWP, but in my view it's a slam dunk, as they say, argument for having the power yourself rather than having to be subjected to decisions that somebody else takes on your behalf. In a broader sense, we are taking an approach as government to mitigate as much as we can the impacts of welfare reform in housing. We are funding some research work, some work to help the sector generally prepare. We've more substantially made resources available in partnership with local authority to mitigate the council tax benefit cut, the 10% cut. And more recently, we've announced that we will set up the Scottish Welfare Fund when responsibility for crisis loans, which will become crisis grants, and community care grants transfer to the Scottish Parliament next April, and will supplement that fund by over £9 million. So we're doing everything we can, but as I've said to the Welfare Reform Committee, and I will say to this committee, nobody can expect the Scottish Government operating within a fixed budget, a declining fixed budget, to be able to mitigate these effects. Absolutely, it's simply not possible, which is why I believe we shouldn't be subjected to decisions taken by a Tory government in Westminster. We should have the ability to take these decisions ourselves.
Okay, thanks. Jim.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. Cabinet Secretary, you have said already this morning in response to detailed questioning from colleagues on the issue of approvals versus completions that you and officials are willing to look again at whether there is scope for greater transparency and a better presentation of the data. So very much look forward to that and welcome the commitment and willingness that you have shown this morning. But is there anything further which government can do to guarantee completions over the 3-year period and beyond?
I'm not sure I understand. What do you mean by guarantee completions?
Well, the government has set a target.
Yeah.
Clearly, you want to demonstrate that you're meeting that target. What more can you do to demonstrate that you are meeting the target year on year?
Well, we will obviously publish the figures year on year, which will demonstrate where we are overall in terms of that target. In the first year, we were significantly above the target. That may not be the case in every year. will be judged overall in terms of our performance against that 5-year target. In terms of what we can do to make sure that target is delivered, because the figures will speak for themselves. There's nothing we could or should do in terms of the presentation of the figures to do that. What we need to do is make sure that all of the things we're talking about this morning we have an absolute focus on, which is getting as much in terms of house building out of the money that we have, which does mean a continued bearing down on subsidy, albeit listening to the concerns about within the sector about sustainability and making sure that we're not going too far in that and undermining our efforts in the process. We've got to continue to find alternative sources of funding to supplement the resources that we have as government, and look at other innovative ways of funding housing. So all of these things are the levers we have to pull to make sure that target is met. Because the importance of meeting the target is not just because it was a government manifesto commitment, although clearly we want to deliver on that. The importance of meeting the target is that these houses are needed because we have significant housing need in the country.
Okay, that's very helpful. Can I move on to a different issue, which is the new phase that we're entering into in terms of the reform of the planning and implementation of affordable housing spend by local government, with the move to multi-year resource planning assumptions, with local authorities taking much more of a lead in the development funding process. Can you outline briefly what you see as being the advantages of that process?
Well, I think the first, I should say that the move that we have made was welcomed by COSLA. Inevitably, in a change like this, there will be people who are nervous about that change and who, want to be convinced that it's the right thing to do and that it won't have unintended consequences. In terms of the advantages, it is about firstly bringing together council and registered social landlord funding streams into one budget for the first time, whereas previously, as I keep saying, when I was last sitting in this seat, those funding streams were separate. So bringing them together so that they are looked at as one holistic overall fund. The advantage that then delivers is the ability of councils to exercise the strategic role that they have more flexibly and put forward to government a programme of social and affordable housing developments that fulfil the housing need that they have identified. And going back to the points Rachel made earlier on, that allows them to look flexibly so that if a particular housing association right now doesn't want to develop, it can look at the other ways in which that housing need can be delivered. I should say that the ultimate sign-off of this remains with government, which I think has been an important assurance for stakeholders that we have an oversight of this and can look to make sure that the plans councils are putting forward have the right mix of council and housing association provision, that they're meeting need and that they're using resources appropriately and in the way that's likely to deliver maximum benefit for them. I guess one of the concerns that housing associations would have would be that councils would spend more of the money on council house building rather than on housing association building. But what we've seen in the plans coming forward so far is a healthy mix. And it is right that mix will vary from one part of the country to the other and probably will vary from one year to the other as well.
Thank you for the answer and also for preempting my next question, which was, as well as the advantages, do you have any concerns about the process? Can I just be clear then that in having this final sign-off as something that remains with the Scottish Government, you're confident that provides you with sufficient strategic oversight of a system where 4/5 of the programme is determined locally?
Yes, because when we our teams working in this area just now are currently in the process of agreeing these programmes with councils across the country. And the things we'll be looking at is the overall balance of the programme, the respective subsidy levels for council and RSL projects, the mix of developers in each area, and any other matters that we consider are appropriate in line with our overall national strategy for housing supply. So I think that final and oversight function is important and helps to guarantee that we are spending the housing investment that we have properly and in the way that will have maximum effectiveness, but still allowing that important local flexibility. In terms of the point I made earlier, which I think preempted your other question, the mix between council and RSL provision will rightly and for good reason vary, but I would expect to see RSL provision as part of the programme in every area across Scotland, unless there were exceptional circumstances that said that that shouldn't be the case.
Thank you.
Gordon.
I just wanted to ask one quick question on the shape of the housing associations. My understanding from witnesses is that they've identified that the reduction in average grant and greater development risk is changing the profile of developing housing associations. In my own constituency, I'm aware that a small community-based housing association has pulled out of developing in the area. And I'm just wondering, what evidence is there that there is a smaller number of larger housing associations taking a greater share of the housing supply? And is that something that we can address?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think that is one of the things that we need to monitor carefully. I mean, if I refer to what some of the key housing association players in my own constituency will tell me, that's one of their concerns, that we will end up going down the kind of road that is much more common in England, where big providers monopolise and dominate the market. We're not there, and we're not anywhere near that in Scotland, but I readily concede that there are drivers and pressures in the system that may give some legitimacy to those concerns. So it is something we'll continue to look carefully at and to monitor. Again, it's largely built on my constituency experience. I am a big fan of community-based housing associations, not just because of the work they do in providing houses, but because of the work they do in building communities. I've got some fantastic housing associations in my constituency, and I want to see them be active players in this for a long, long time to come. So we will, monitor that carefully and listen to concerns that are being expressed.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you've said that there is a danger that large associations could dominate and monopolise, and we're not quite there yet, but is there anything we can do to support small community-based housing associations to develop locally?
I think it is about keeping flexibility in the system. I don't think we're anywhere near there yet. Instead, it's not that I don't think we're quite there. We're nowhere near that. But we do have to listen to the voices of concern that are being raised. And it is about listening and responding as well as we can to some of that, to make sure that we are designing a system of housing finance that delivers the volume of houses we need, but is mindful of the particular needs and constraints and circumstances of smaller providers. Now, I can't do anything other than concede that there is very often a real tension between these two agendas, and I know that is a concern to some of those small housing associations right now. I can't magic away that tension. I think we've just got to manage it as well as we can to try and ensure that we're protecting that community-based provision as well as doing our best to meet the volume targets that we have rightly, for good reason, set.
Okay, thanks.
Alex?
Thank you. The government have set a target of 6,000 units of affordable housing a year, but some of the evidence we're getting indicate that witnesses believe that the need might actually be as high as 10,000 a year. So what I'd like to know from you, Minister, is to what extent do you believe that spending allocations for new affordable houses match with the actual levels of need? And how do they match with the spatial distribution of need across Scotland?
I'd like us to be able to do more, and if you can have a word with your colleague George Osborne and suggest he might want to give us some capital consequentials, I'd be happy to warmly welcome that. We are doing as much as we can within the, I was going to say constrained capital budgets, but the rapidly and dramatically diminishing capital budgets that we've got. There is massive housing need in Scotland. I know that from my own constituency experience. Everybody around this table will know it from their own local experience. The target we've set is what we consider to be a realistic and achievable target, notwithstanding all the issues that we've been talking about this morning, and we'll continue to deliver that. But we will also continue to look for any way possible of diverting extra resources into housing in order to continue to meet that need as best we can. In terms of spatial allocations, over the summer this year, a government and COSLA working group has been looking at future resource planning assumptions and how they can better be based on a needs-based formula, and we're currently considering the recommendations from that working group, and we'll hopefully be able to announce that shortly. It's effectively just looking at how we better allocate the money we've got to reflect where the need is on that spatial basis. And I'm happy to keep the committee up to date with the recommendations that flow from that.
Okay. What's the continuing rationale for allocating 2/3 of the additional affordable housing supply to be defined as social housing, of which 5,000 units should be council built?
The first part of that is to reflect that there is a substantial need for social housing, and therefore I think it's right that we set that 2/3 target. That 2/3 target is probably slightly less than the kind of split between social and other affordable housing might have been in the past, where it's, I think, been maybe above 70%. I think it's right in the current environment that we do have perhaps a slightly lower. There's, different forms of housing need, people who don't necessarily fall into the criteria of eligibility for social housing, but equally can't afford to access housing through traditional ways of getting a mortgage, for example, that bit in the middle. So I think recognising that is important. Also, having houses within the affordable criteria that are not social houses also enables us to, or better enables us to look at different ways of levering in innovative financing in terms of the return you can get on that kind of investment. So that's the broad rationale for it. The 5,000 council houses, I think, goes back to Adam's point that I think we do need, while I absolutely believe that RSLs are going to continue to be the lead player here, I think we'd allowed council house building, not we, previous governments had allowed council house building to wither and die on the vine, and I think it was right that we reversed that and got councils building again.
Mm-hmm. We're very close to the point where we'll find out if we've achieved the 2012 homelessness target. To what extent do you think current levels of affordable housing supply will have an effect on the ability to deliver on that commitment?
It's a big factor, not the only factor, but it is a big factor. I mean, as you say, we're very close to seeing whether we'll meet that or not. I certainly hope we do. I think that was an achievable target. We obviously, to tackle homeless, need to have supply of houses for people to live in. That is common sense and it is an obvious statement to make. But a lot of the work that has been done by councils to work towards the target, which in the case of many councils, fantastic work around preventing homelessness, working with people to better enable them to sustain tenancies, to deal with some of the root causes of homelessness. These are all big factors as well as just the headline figures in terms of housing supply, but you certainly can't underestimate the importance of that aspect.
Thank you.
Malcolm?
I think this is the end of the housing section, but we're very focused, obviously, for both housing and transport on the issue of climate change. And to your many other responsibilities, we might legitimately call you the Cabinet Secretary for Climate Change, because whether we meet our climate change objectives or not will depend more on your portfolio than any other. So in terms of housing, you may have seen the recent WWF report, which concluded that a dramatic increase in funding to alleviate fuel poverty through improved energy efficiency in housing was required in order to meet the housing contribution towards our climate change objectives. I mean, obviously there are many other advantages in terms of dealing with the issue of fuel poverty for the individuals involved, but in terms of the WWF report, it was the climate change aspect that they were highlighting. So I suppose the question is what more can be done to make homes more energy efficient and sustainable, and thereby meet the housing element of the target.
Okay, I'm going to resist the acquisition of the title Minister for Climate Change, not just because I've got plenty to be keeping me going within the portfolio I do have, but I think my colleague who does have that responsibility would probably have something to say about it. It is obviously important right across the government in terms of how we are spending money to meet our climate change targets, and I know the details of the draft budget breakdown and how that relates to the RPP implementation are in spice, and I think all committees have had sight of that. The figure roughly, I think, don't quote me on it precisely, but I think for housing, warm homes, etc., the figure for this year and next is, or for the next 2 years actually, not this year and next, is 2013 and 14 it's 120 million, 2014 and 15 114 million, so 230 odd million over these 2 years. In terms of fuel poverty, it's an issue I think that should be and is a priority for the government, and it's an issue that should concern all of us. You've rightly asked me that question from the perspective of climate change, making our homes more efficient, and we've got a number of strands of funding and strands of work that are trying to deliver on that. Our fund for green house building, which I launched not too long ago to encourage green methods of construction and to look to incentivise funding for that. The Warm Homes Fund, which is part of the Futures Fund that we are also committed to. In terms of our core fuel poverty and energy efficiency budgets, we've got the energy assistance package, which has invested heavily in tackling fuel poverty over the past few years. We will launch next year, to reflect the changes that are coming from the UK government, from CERT to ECO and the Green Deal. We'll launch the National Retrofit Programme, which will take our government funding, which is in the region of £65 million a year, and add that to the funding we're able to lever in from the energy companies to give us a fund of in the region of £200 million a year to prioritise and address energy efficiency in our homes. I should say, and I say this is my last point, while we can always do more, and I always approach these things from the point of view of can we do more, and if we can, we should do more. But if you contrast the Scottish Government's approach to the fuel poverty here, we have continued to fund heavily in fuel poverty. The UK Government is reducing its government budgets for these issues to zero next year. So while there is always, as I say, pressure on us to do more, I do think we should reflect on the fact that we are doing more than the UK Government is, a lot more.
I mean, last point. I mean, I've actually got a question to your colleague, the Minister for Climate Change, this afternoon about some of these matters. But when he went to his Environment Committee on the 24th of October, he said, and he could have been talking about housing, he said, transport is not in my portfolio, and I cannot make changes in that regard. All that we can do is act in an advisory capacity. And of course, he could have said the same about housing. So in a kind of way, I was making a serious point. I mean, that it is up to individual cabinet secretaries, according to what your colleague, the Minister, is saying, to drive forward the climate change objective. So my final question, although I'll come back to it on transport, is where do the climate change imperatives sit in your scale of priorities for your enormous range of responsibilities?
Can I firstly apologise if I answered a serious question a bit too flippantly? I didn't mean to. We do have a Minister for Climate Change, a Cabinet Secretary responsible for climate change, but climate change is every Minister's business, and we make very strong efforts to operate as a joined-up government, making sure that these overarching priorities are reflected very strongly in each individual portfolio, and that's certainly true of transport and housing within my own portfolio. In answer to your question, it is extremely high up the list of priorities. We as a nation, a society, a planet, have got massive imperatives around climate change, and all of us have to give that due priority. But if you take it slightly away from the global imperative of tackling climate change, there's, as you rightly say, the added imperative of making our houses more energy efficient, not just for the sake of our environment, but for the sake of the individuals who currently, with rising energy prices, are struggling to heat their homes. The more energy efficient we can make houses, the easier we make it for people to affordably heat their homes and tackle fuel poverty. So it's a priority with many different driving forces, but climate change and our responsibilities there are certainly very near the top of that list.
Okay. Anyone else got any questions on housing before we move on to the active travel? No? Okay, Jim, do you want to start off on this?
Thank you, Convener. The Government has set a very ambitious target through its Cycling Action Plan for Scotland of 10% of all journeys by bicycle by 2020. Now, this committee took evidence from cycling organisations on the 26th of September, and when asked by me whether the Scottish Government is currently investing enough in cycling to achieve the target, witnesses were unanimous in stating that the target could not be met with the current level of investment. Cycling Scotland stated, "No, I do not think that there is currently enough funding to do that." Sustrans, who welcomed the additional investment in cycling in last year's budget, nonetheless said, "As the funding stands, it is not going to happen." And Pedal on Parliament indicated, this is the organisation that brought 3,000 people to lobby the Scottish Parliament on this issue, earlier in the year, said, "As the funding stands, it is not we need a specific and highly noticeable fund for active travel. It needs to be a significant amount. We are talking about a step change in funding." So, ambitious target. The cycling organisations unanimous in their view that without additional investment, it will not be met.
Well, can I say, firstly, it might just be worth reflecting on the fact that target of 10% is one that we are committed to. Again, it's a bit like my comments about the housing targets. They're not easy targets to meet. There would be no point setting them if they were easy, but there is a commitment and a determination. Across Scotland, we have work to do, lots of work to do in order to deliver them. I think it's probably worth saying, actually, that some local authorities are a lot closer to them than others. This city, for example, it leads the way with a 7% modal share for cycling for commuting. Now, I say that simply because it's a point I'll return to at the end of my answer. I do think that is leadership by example and a sign that local authorities can do more than some of them are doing just now. I'll make the obvious point that I've made already this morning. We have a fixed budget, and if anybody argues that we should be spending more in one area, then clearly that money has to come from another area of the budget. And while I often hear lots of people in lots of different areas, understandably and rightly saying we want more money for X, Y or Z, I much more rarely hear them saying where that money should come from. In terms of the importance of this, I don't dispute that for a second. As I've said already this morning, I come to this job with 5 years of experience as Health Secretary. I know the importance of active travel and active living, not just for the environment, but for people's health. In terms of what we are spending, the sustainable and active travel budget, when you strip out the amount in it next year for FastLink, that's budget this year is 11 million, it'll be 10 million this year. On top of that, the Cycling and Walking Scotland allocation is this year 6 million, will be just under 6 million next year, and 2014 and 15 it's projected to go up to 8.2 million pounds. So there are significant sums of money being invested. We had a manifesto commitment which you'll remember that said we wanted to continue to increase the proportion of transport spend on low carbon, active and sustainable travel. The proportion of spend this year will be 1.42%, which doesn't sound a lot, but that's up from 1% in 2010-11. So I'm always sympathetic to the arguments that we should do more, and we will look for opportunities to do more. Keith Brown said that we would look wherever we could for additional resources for cycling. That commitment was made good when John Swinney announced in his budget in September an additional £6 million over what had previously been planned. So we're doing as much as we can. There is an appetite to do more. But I'll end on the point I sort of started with. We need local authorities to do more as well. The Cycling and Walking Scotland budget is designed to incentivise and encourage that, but Edinburgh should be a signal to other local authorities that more can be done.
You'll forgive me, Cabinet Secretary, if I hold your feet to the fire a little longer on this issue, because that's what my constituents would expect me to do. The manifesto commitment was to active and sustainable travel, but if you take out the laudable commitment to things like green buses and actually focus on cycling, the cycling organisations have made it clear that they do not think that the target will be met unless there is sufficient investment into cycling. Not active and sustainable travel, but cycling.
Okay, with the greatest of respect, I know this is a matter that's important to consider. I represent an urban area, it's important there as well. I do think it's appropriate to look at active and sustainable travel in its entirety, because, you know, obviously we want to encourage people to cycle, but we want to encourage people to walk more. We want to encourage people to use the bus or the train as opposed to get in their car. So, you know, I can understand why cycling organisations want to isolate the cycling bit of it. I think if we are looking at our priorities in terms of health, fitness and environment, it's absolutely right and proper that we look at it in its entirety. All of that said, I've got enormous sympathy for those cycling organisations and people who want to see us do more on cycling. And, you know, there is, as there was previously and evidenced by the 6 million, there is an appetite for us to do more. But we do operate within a fixed budget. And, you know, unless people are going to tell us where that money should come from, then we have to continue to make these judgments as best we can. But we will continue to try to maximise the investment that we make in cycling in order to meet our target, and we will encourage local authorities to do more. And I think local authorities, in many respects, could be doing more than they are just now.
I hear what you say about the Scottish Government operating within a declining fixed budget and the need to say where the money would come from. But what the cycling organisations tell us, what I've told this committee, is that less than 1% of the transport budget is being spent on cycling. Now, we heard evidence from the Association of Directors of Public Health who said that they believed that 10% of transport expenditure should be invested in active travel. I just wondered, is that something that you think even in the long term is capable of being achieved?
Well, I'm not disputing the figure you've just cited to me there. I gave you a figure that was 1.42% of the transport budget on active and sustainable travel. So if you isolate cycling, I don't have the specific figure, but it is probably as you've just cited to me. I want to see that increase. It goes without saying, but I'll say it. I want to see that increase. And what I'm saying to you is the government is determined to do everything it can to get that figure up. I think we've got to be realistic about how we can do that, but there is that determination there, and I'm starting to repeat myself now, but the commitment in the budget to an additional 6 million over what we had previously thought we could do is a very tangible sign that if we can get more resources into this to make it easier for us, not just to meet that target, but maybe longer term exceed that target, then we will certainly do so.
Okay, thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Can I ask you one final question on the refresh of the Cycling Action Plan for Scotland? There has been a delay in the publication of the progress report. I'm not concerned about that if it means that we get the refresh right. So if we need to take more time to produce something, to produce the best possible document, then that's fine. But do you know when it will be published, and how does the government intend to take that work forward? One of the things we also heard in evidence from witnesses was that we have some of the best policies in the world, but actually it's the implementation of those that matters.
I absolutely agree with that. I mean, if I had £1 for every time I'd heard of that in relation to different things, I could probably get to your target of spending. That is absolutely the case. There's no point having great policies if we're not implementing them properly. In terms of your question about the Cycling Action Plan, ministers are currently considering the progress report on the action plan, which was recently submitted by Cycling Scotland, and Keith Brown will be saying more about that very soon. In terms of the refresh of the document, the aim is to publish that in the spring of next year, following consultation with stakeholders, which will kick off at the Cycling Scotland conference next week, and there'll be plenty of opportunities to contribute to that refresh. I mean, I think it is worth repeating and that we are absolutely committed to the 10% vision. I'm not wanting to diminish in any way the evidence and the sincerity of the evidence given by the organisations involved in this, and we want to work with them to get to that. Big factor in that is funding. I absolutely accept that, but it's not the only factor. There are other things we need to be working to do as well, and that's why the action plan and the refresh of that action plan is so important.
Thank you very much.
Madam.
Just following on from Jim E's questions, the committee's view was that the active travel investment is very difficult to disentangle within the budget documentation, and we're looking for much more transparency in the future. Can the government commit to providing clear budget lines showing total Scottish Government investment in walking and cycling in all future budget documents as recommended in our previous committee budget reports?
Yes, I'm happy to give the undertaking that we will look to see how we do that, and I've got some sympathy as a relatively new minister trying to get to grips with the portfolio and get to grips with the spending lines and what lies beneath them. I've got some sympathy with what you say there about the challenges in doing that in this area, so I'll certainly go away from here and have a discussion about how in future budgets we might present that in a way that is easier for the committee to scrutinise.
Thank you.
In terms of encouraging active travel at an early age and early intervention, Cycling Scotland would like all children to have cycle training, and it looks as if it's patchy. Does the government have any plans to fully fund child cycle training and make its delivery mandatory in all schools?
I think I'm happy to come back to the committee with just a bit more detail on this, because I suspect it would be, I may be wrong here, but I suspect it would be a local authority responsibility here. I think what we are seeking to do is roll that out as fully and as quickly as possible. But in terms of where we are in that process, I'm happy to provide some more information to you.
Okay, thanks. If we move on to other transport issues and general issues, Malcolm, do you want to come back on climate change?
If I could return to climate change, where the story in transport is not good. Transport-related greenhouse gas emissions account for 19% of all emissions, but in fact they have gone up since 1990, which is clearly a problem in terms of our ambitious climate change targets. Now, obviously there is a carbon assessment of the draft budget, but I think there may be a problem with it because it does not capture downstream emission impacts that may result from government spending. And the example that I want to home in on is the emissions from increased road use. And the chart on page 158 of the draft budget shows that in the last 5 years, spending on motorways and trunk roads has increased by almost 40%, from 498 million to 690 million, while most other transport spending lines have remained largely unchanged. So given that transport is the sector with the worst record in tackling climate change emissions, and that the vast majority of transport emissions come from the road sector, why is the Scottish Government pursuing still further increases in road spending in this budget from 655 million to 673 million? Well,
let me answer that point directly first and then maybe come on to some of the other things we're doing to try to deal with emissions in transport, because I absolutely accept the importance of transport in that broader climate change responsibility. I mean, we need as a country for economic reasons, to keep us connected, to make sure that we have ease of travel for all the reasons we all understand, to have a roads network that is up to scratch, and that involves investment in maintenance on our roads network. It also, from time to time, involves significant investment in new roads or upgraded roads. I don't have the particular graph that you're referring to in front of me just now, but I suspect the figure in terms of the one you quoted in terms of the road budget takes account of some big projects in recent times, the M74 completion, for example, which as a resident and representative of the City of Glasgow has been transformational in terms of the ease of access through that city. Will take account, or may or may not take account of the Aberdeen Western Peripheral route, which thankfully we're now able to progress. So, you know, yes, we want to encourage people out of cars, and I'm a big, as a non-driver, I'm a big advocate of encouraging people out of cars. But I also understand absolutely the importance of having a well-resourced, well-maintained roads network. In terms of other responsibilities of government, I gave you the 2-year figure for housing, for the spend of the housing budget that is related to climate change targets. That figure over 2 years in terms of transport is 134.2 million to reduce the impact of transport on our carbon emissions, and that includes a range of things: active travel, which we've just been talking about, low carbon vehicles, congestion reduction. It includes current spending around the promotion of low-carbon vehicles, car clubs, hybrid buses, new rail investment, congestion management, hybrid ferries, freight support. And that will be across a number of different budget lines: sustainable and active travel, future transport fund, ferries, intelligent transport systems. So we are focusing on giving leadership in a number of areas that will help us to deliver the behaviour change that is necessary to getting people out of their cars and into more sustainable forms of transport. It's a long-term objective, and it's going to take time to do that, but it's important that we provide the leadership in the ways that I've spoken about.
Okay, well, that was really interesting to learn. You were a non-driver, but when I was Transport Minister in 1997, it was quite a matter of comment that I was a non-driver, so perhaps you've just created a little story about
or maybe that. Nobody knew, exactly.
But now, Stop Climate Chaos Scotland, who obviously know a thing or two about this, say that the draft budget does not provide the levels of funding required to meet climate change targets as set out in the report on proposals and policies. So what would your view be on that, and can you tell us if the current RPP is or is not funded under this budget?
Well, the current RPP doesn't just deal with government funding. It obviously takes a whole society view and looks at behaviour change and other sources of funding that are required. So government funding will only ever be a part of that. We spoke earlier on about the overarching importance of climate change. We've won plaudits as a parliament, as a government, for setting very ambitious climate change targets. I think it's right to be ambitious. That then delivers a responsibility to live up to that and to meet those targets. And that is going to take concerted action and effort by government with all of our partners over a long period of time. I don't want to keep making this point, but we have a fixed budget. We need to make the decisions as best we can within that budget, and that's what we've done in this draft budget. But we will continue to prioritise efforts to tackle climate change as we deliver future budgets as well.
But do you not think there is a particular problem with transport, because we're failing on transport in climate change terms, and yet a lot of the laudable objectives and policies you described in the last answer but one are not particularly new policies. So I mean, there is a problem here, because you would kind of anticipate, if we go on doing what we've always done, we'll have the same failures that we've always had in relation to this problem.
I'm not sure it's entirely fair to say we're just going on doing what we've always done. I mean, some of the stuff I spoke about is, investment in low carbon vehicles. That's the thing we need to do more of. If I, think about some of our investments in my own city, investing in a new rapid transit bus system, Fast Link, massive investment in the subway to bring that up to scratch, because without that investment it will be harder to encourage people to use those forms of transport. So we need to continue to take action across a range of all of these areas. Are we doing enough? I'm not sure any government in any country in the world could sit back and pat itself in the back and say we're doing enough to tackle climate change. There should always be pressure to do more, and we will, as the Scottish Government, always look to see within the competing priorities we have how we do more to meet these targets.
Right, Margaret?
Yes, moving on to the Edinburgh-Glasgow Improvement Programme. There was a major consultation exercise on Egypt which finished on the 31st of January this year. The Scottish Government announced the go-ahead for a reduced scope Egypt on the 4th of July. Can you give an assurance that the reduced scope Egypt project continues to represent value for money?
Well, the phased delivery programme that Keith Brown announced on the 4th of July is affordable, it's achievable. Yes, we believe it will deliver value for money, it will deliver faster journey times, improved reliability, enhanced stations, increased capacity, which will help to meet passenger demand well into the next decade. And perhaps the statistic I could give you that is most germane to your point about value for money is that the first phase that Keith announced in July will deliver almost 80% of the benefits of the whole, the original programme at 60% of the costs. Now, I think that indicates value for money. Of course, we remain committed as we're able to commit the resources to all of the other aspects of the Egypt programme, but the first phase announced by Keith, as I said, is affordable and achievable and will deliver, in my view, significant benefits for the travelling public.
Okay, and my last question is the £3 million reduced spending on the Egypt project, will that remain in the transport budget? And if so, what will it be spent on? 300 million, sorry, 300 million.
Do you want to answer that particular?
You mean the difference from the 1 billion original investment programme to the 650 million?
300 million.
The Egypt programme is funded through Network Rail's RAB borrowing basis, so that level of funding isn't in our budgets at this point in time. The payments will be occurred over the next 30 years as the programme is taken forward. The funding is built into the high-level output specification that was announced in July for the funding over the next period, but it doesn't appear in the budgets just now because we're at the start of that programme.
So it will be principally funded through the borrowing through the regulatory asset base.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to be very generous and let my colleague Alec Johnson lead on the AWPR questions.
On the subject of the AWPR, we have now reached the end of the horror story that was the court challenge. And in a written answer, the figure for construction cost is now likely to be 653 million plus VAT at 2012 prices. And that's up from 347 million at 2003 prices. We're now in a position where a time scale appears to be being set quickly. What's the likely outturn cost?
That's the information that was in the answer, is the latest estimate of the cost of
that was at 2012 prices, is that my understanding of it?
That's 2012 prices.
Yes, we have those 2012 prices.
Yeah.
Yes. Are you in a position to make any estimates of the eventual cost of the project at this stage?
Well, we can make an estimate based on a standard government flow of inflation of 2.5% per annum going forward to the completion time, but it will depend on inflation levels between now and completion as to what the actual outturn cost is, and also the result of the tendering process as to what the competition price comes in at.
I'm happy to provide the committee with some information around the factors that would lead to that answer, but the figure that means something just now is the figure that was in that answer, which is the £653 million at 2012 prices. The vast bulk of the increase, of course, is down to inflation as a result of the delays through the court process. Yeah.
The final question I was going to ask is that the increased cost of the AWPR project is obviously going to have an effect on the amount of money available for other projects. Where do you at this moment, or are you at this moment, in a position to say how it will impact on other projects over the next few years?
No, I mean, we'll obviously make the overall decisions that we need to budget for and fund. The government's meeting the largest share of the cost of the DWPR, which is 81% of the total cost of the northern leg and the southern leg elements, and Aberdeen City Council and Aberdeenshire Council are both contributing 9.5% of that. So, you know, yes, there's an increased cost, but it's within certain limits, and we will, you know, take appropriate budgeting decisions in future years about how to factor that into the budget without having a massive impact on other projects.
Can I just ask about trunk road maintenance budgets? There have been recent media reports, whether true or not, about an increase of 6% since last year on the work required for maintenance. Do you believe that we've got the balance right between the funding of new trunk roads and the maintenance of the existing network?
I think that's one of these things that, you know, governments always have to make sure they're keeping under close review. It's not exactly the same, but, you know, it was an issue I would frequently, you know, have discussions about in terms of the healthy state, you know, the balance between making sure routine cyclical maintenance is done and investing in new hospitals or new health centres. So that's just a feature of ongoing planning. But, you know, we are absolutely committed as a government to making sure that the trunk road network remains safe, that it remains efficient, that enables businesses and commuters to engage and to get to where they need to be. Yeah, I think since 2007 we've invested a total of more than £2 billion in maintaining and improving the trunk road network, and, you know, we need to continue to invest at appropriate and realistic levels to make sure that we keep it safe and up to scratch.
Okay, does anyone have any final questions on the budget? Okay, the committee, that's the last of the evidence. The committee will consider all the evidence gathered on our scrutiny of the draft budget at its next meeting. Can I thank all the witnesses for their evidence? If we could have the stuff that you've promised throughout the meeting as soon as possible, that would be helpful. Cabinet Secretary, you're staying with us for our consideration of the water bill, but can I have we declare a short break for the changeover of your official Right, if we just make a start, we move on to agenda item 2, which is the Water Resources Scotland Bill. We'll now hear our final evidence on this bill at stage 1 from the Cabinet Secretary of Infrastructure, Investment and Cities. So can I welcome Nicola Sturgeon back, together with supporting officials, Christina Phillips, Bill Manager from the Water Industry Team, and Stephen Rees, Legal Directorate from the Scottish Government. Cabinet Secretary, do you wish to make a brief opening statement on this?
Very briefly, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the bill this morning. In Scotland, obviously, we have a relative abundance of water. We've got a beautiful water environment, and in Scottish Water, we've got a highly successful public corporation. So what this bill is seeking to do is acknowledge the importance of water as a natural asset, put a duty on ministers and others to develop Scotland as a hydro nation, one which utilises its water resources to their fullest potential, and to further improve our management and protection of the water environment. It's an ambitious agenda, and I think it goes without saying that the work of building Scotland into a hydro nation will not just be down to legislation that we pass. It's also about the programme of work we're developing alongside this legislation. Obviously, when we say that water is a precious resource, it's important to emphasise that we're not just referring to the physical liquid, but also to the expertise that we have in Scotland around water governance, the academics we have who've got specialist knowledge of global water issues and management, our track record in developing new and innovative technologies in the sector. So taking all of that into account, it's clear that we've got a very thriving and dynamic water sector, and the role of government, helped by this bill, is to encourage collaboration, support innovation, and find fresh approaches to make sure that we're maximising the potential of it.
Okay, thank you. I think there's some concern that we've certainly heard in evidence as to what extent the bill and the hydronation agenda will benefit customers in Scotland, and specifically, will any economic gains be derived from better management of the water resource, and will they be passed on to customers in the form of lower bills?
I've read all of the oral evidence that's been given to the committee, and I know that's been one of the issues you've discussed with witnesses. I do think that this bill has the potential to deliver both tangible and perhaps more intangible benefits to customers. Longer term, and in the tangible category, it would be open to ministers. It would be subject to future ministerial decision making, but clearly it would be open to ministers to utilise or allow to be utilised any profits deriving from the commercial activities of Scottish Water in its non-core business to benefit the customers and consumers of Scottish Water's core business products, and that, you know, is certainly possible, although, as I say, it would be down to decisions that ministers take. Secondly, and perhaps more in the intangible or less tangible column of this, would be, you know, if we encourage Scottish Water, and indeed to the extent that we're doing in this bill, place duties on Scottish Water to maximise the full potential of its resources, to innovate, to, you know, become even more expert and even more willing to use, to utilise, and even to develop the latest technologies and the latest thinking around all of this, then that will have a crossover effect into how they do their business in terms of their core functions, which will benefit customers. And thirdly and lastly, I think it benefits all of us in some way if we develop Scotland as a global leader on the hydronation front, you know, being recognised as a leader in terms of use of water, the sharing of expertise around the management and governance of water, and sharing that expertise in other parts of the world. I think that benefits all of us.
At the same time as we're considering this bill, Cabinet Secretary, the EU are consulting on the blueprint to safeguard Europe's waters. How has the Scottish Government taken account of these developing EU and any UK policies which might affect the bill?
It's an important question because obviously these two agendas are to some extent running in parallel. I mean, you'll be aware that the European consultation has very recently closed. My officials are keeping a very close track of progress as we await the publication of the report. We believe that our hydronation agenda in general, and this bill in particular, is consistent with the priorities across Europe around good stewardship of water. The principles involved in the European work are very much about improving the implementation of current EU water policy by making full use of the opportunities in the current framework. So we believe very much that what we are doing is very consistent with developments on the European front, but we will continue to monitor and track that very carefully to make sure there is that alignment.
Have your officials flagged up any inconsistencies that might arise?
I think broadly speaking, I think there is one area around metering where we're mindful that that there may not be an immediate alignment, but generally speaking, in terms of the principles, in terms of the thrust, in terms of the objectives, we're pretty comfortable that what we're doing is aligning closely. But obviously we'll keep very close to it. Once the report is published, I mean, the committee may want to take specific evidence around the interaction of the two, and I'd be very happy to come along and speak to the committee at that time.
Okay, thanks. Both the James Hutton Institute and the Centre for Water Law Policy highlight the benefits of linking the proposals in the bill with land use strategy and with wider climate change ambitions. How do you respond to this suggestion? And do you think that such links could be beneficial in fostering a more holistic approach to developing Scotland's water resource?
Yes, I do. I think we should look to make links between all of the different areas of our policy, and certainly I think that's absolutely correct, that in this area there are obvious links between planning, between climate change, and we need to make sure we are understanding of those links and ensuring a joined up approach. I mean, I think, probably going back to one of the points I made in my opening remarks, the bill is only one part of the hydronation agenda, and I think that whole hydronation agenda encompasses all of the other sort of strands of work that you talk about.
I suppose following on from that, we heard calls from environment and consumer groups for Scottish Water to educate its customers more on water saving measures. Do you intend to require Scottish Water to undertake such an education campaign?
Yeah, I mean, they're already engaged in some trial work here as well, so we'll certainly discuss the evidence in this regard that's come out of the committee with Scottish Water and make sure they factor that into the work they have planned already or might be planning in the future.
Okay, thanks. Malcolm.
I suppose one of the issues with the bill is just what is actually required by legislation as distinct from things you can do already or things that you're going to progress, as you've indicated just now, as part of the wider hydronation agenda. So I suppose, just focusing on part one of the bill to begin with, can you outline the benefits of the proposals in part one? And I suppose from the point of view that Scottish ministers can already require public bodies to work together and can already require a focus on the development of water resources. So what in a sense, are the benefits, and which parts of part one are actually legislatively required, as it were?
The answer, and I understand you're asking me specifically about part one, but I would apply this to some extent to different parts of the bill, part three as well. The difference is between things that can be done just now and things that this bill say should be done in terms of the placing of a duty on ministers and in a later part of the bill on Scottish Water itself. And I think that's important that we move from a more permissive approach to this to very clear and explicit duties. In terms of part one, a duty on ministers to take steps to ensure the development of the value of Scotland's water resources is a pretty strong thing to place on ministers, and it's I think much more powerful and much more meaningful than simply saying, well, there's nothing stopping ministers doing it already. It highlights the importance of water as a national resource. It highlights the importance of us realising the potential of that resource, both domestically and internationally, and makes clear that we have a duty that we are accountable to Parliament on. And obviously there's a reporting duty on ministers to Parliament, so that we can demonstrate to Parliament what has been done in order to implement that duty.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. The committee has heard numerous calls for the definition of the value of Scotland's water resource to be broader than that currently in Part 1 of the bill, and in particular there's been a suggestion that there should be a reference to social and environmental factors set out on the face of the bill. How would you react to that suggestion, which has come from quite a few different groups, I think?
It has come from a lot of groups, and I've been very mindful of that as I've been reading through the evidence. I mean, I'm very clear in my understanding and interpretation of the bill as drafted that the phrase as it's currently drafted certainly gives an indication of the importance of economic value, but it doesn't do that to the detriment of other factors such as environmental benefits or social benefits. Members will also be aware that separately, ministers are tasked to act in a way that ensures sustainable use of resources. So I think it's worth bearing that in mind as well. All of that said, I was struck by, if not the unanimity of that view, then the near unanimity of that view. And, we'll certainly be giving consideration as we go into stage 2 as to whether we want to respond to that by bringing forward any amendments.
Okay, that's helpful as well. Thanks. The Centre for Water Law and Scottish and Southern Energy suggested that any direction issued by Scottish ministers to a designated body should first be subject to a public consultation. And I think the Centre for Law also said there should be a requirement to consult the designated bodies as part of that. Do you support this proposal, but also can you give an indication as to the types of directions that might be issued?
Well, I would envisage, as a minister, the power of direction being used very sparingly, and I think it's hard to kind of isolate particular examples because we're dealing with a number of organisations that are listed in the bill. But for you could give a direction for an organisation to ring fence a particular bit of activity to focus on the particular issues in this bill. But I wouldn't anticipate it being used overly liberally. In terms of the specific point about consultation, again, I've looked carefully at the evidence that's been submitted on this point, and we will reflect on all of the evidence that's been submitted. I think on balance, my view at the moment is that I don't agree that the issuing of a direction of this nature should require a public consultation or a wider consultation. Clearly, it would require consultation with the particular body that was being subject to the direction, but you'll know as a previous minister that ministerial directions are often given for particular reasons and particular circumstances, and I think to have a requirement to wider consultation built into that, certainly on the face of the bill, would limit the ability of ministers to quickly and flexibly use the power of direction. So I guess my view at the moment is that I wouldn't be sympathetic to changing it in that direction, but we'll continue to consider the evidence that's been given.
Okay, well, I think that's fair enough. I mean, I think a compromise might be consultation with one or possibly all the designated bodies. I suppose that would be another compromise. I'm sure we'll return to that in the report, and who knows, possibly in amendments. Now, my final question is about the reporting requirements. I think there is some concern that Section 26 of the Water, Environment and Water Services Act of 2003 is being repealed because that does relate to reporting, and as I say, there's some confusion about what is taking place. Instead of that, there is a requirement to report on by ministers on the exercise of their functions under the bill, but people are not clear whether that's every 3 years or as a one-off requirement after 3 years. So if you could try and clarify that and also comment on concerns about repeal of the 2003 requirement.
In relation to the 3-year provision, first of all, I mean, I think we've got to recognise that this is a long-term agenda, and I think my judgment would certainly be that, given that it's a long-term agenda, 3 years is a reasonable time to expect a progress report. So that would be my first answer. I should say, and this will also form part of my answer to the second bit of your question, Parliament can ask ministers for an update at any time. You can ask a minister to come to a committee at any time. So the fact that there is a legislative statutory requirement for a report after 3 years does not in any way limit the ability of Parliament to hold ministers to account and to scrutinise progress at an earlier stage. I have noted the comments from stakeholders, and you've hinted at this as well, that they would like greater clarity around a regular timetable for reports to be submitted. I think the way the bill is drafted, it's a report after 3 years. We will be looking, I will look to see whether there are amendments we should introduce at stage 2 to make clear that there is a regular reporting requirement after that first 3-year report. In terms of the Water Environment and Water Services Act and the repealing of that particular provision, the information that was required there is readily available, and as I said earlier on, MSPs are able to ask for an update at any time they want. I'm not sure that we should continue with the burden of annual reporting around what is a long-term agenda unless there's a good reason to do so. So I think the 3 years that we're moving to in the bill, with the comments I've made about possible amendments to put that on a regular basis, is the right balance to strike.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, if we move on to the control of water abstraction, Alex.
Lena, water abstraction's become my favourite subject on this bill. The section on abstraction wasn't part of the prior consultation, and we've heard a number of people express concern about that. So why didn't you consult on the abstraction rules prior to the introduction of the bill?
It wasn't. It wasn't because we didn't want to consult. It was simply down to the fact that this particular part of the bill was developed at a relatively late stage of the process. So it was a timing issue. And we developed this part of the bill after the 2 consultation exercises had already been undertaken. And the abstraction provisions in the bill, which I no doubt will come on to talk about in substance, are about highlighting the value of the resource we have in Scotland and looking at how we make sure we're safeguarding that for the future. So I recognise the fact that there was not the same level of consultation around this as there was about other parts of the bill. But my officials have continued to talk to stakeholders about this. We will continue to do so. We will pay particularly close attention to the comments that have been made to the committee, both in oral and written evidence about this particular part, in order to inform any changes we might or might not want to introduce at stage 2.
There have been a small number of specialist interest groups within the consultation that have suggested it might be appropriate for the government to conduct some kind of formal consultation before stage 3 of the bill. Do you feel that's necessary, or do you feel you're doing that in the interim?
I think the process we're going through just now is, a fairly well-established consultative process. So I'm not convinced there is a need for more formal consultation around this. I mean, we are happy to, and we're happy to continue to talk to any particular group or stakeholder interest who has a particular concern, who might want to try to persuade us to bring forward amendments at stage 2. So we're happy to continue to have that open dialogue as we approach stage 2 and into stage 3 of the bill. And obviously the committee's report will be important in our considerations as well.
Among the witnesses we've had, there have been a few that suggested that they see the abstraction provisions in the bill, or the policy intention of those abstraction provisions, as being unclear, particularly given that the abstraction of water is already controlled by the Controlled Activities Regulations. Can you explain what the new system will achieve that the current system doesn't?
A lot, in my view. I mean, the car system is only looking at environmental issues So it's, and that's not a criticism of it, but it's restricted to looking at environmental factors. And I should say the committee will know this, but it's worth putting on the record that the bill doesn't interfere with that process. So, you know, people who want to abstract water will still require to go through the CAR process. They will, over the threshold, now simply also have to go through the additional process. So, you know, and it's laid out in the bill, you know, ministers in considering applications will be able to have a range, to have regard to a range of things that's not possible to have regard to under the CAR process. So the social and economic value, the financial circumstances of the applicant, the overall effect of the abstraction. And what that does, in a way that you can't do simply by looking at the environmental impact, is allow us to have that overall view of the value of the resource and make judgments bearing in mind the value of the resource about whether large-scale abstractions are allowing us to properly and appropriately safeguard that resource.
Some key stakeholders have raised concerns about the activities that are exempted from the new consent regime for large-scale water abstractions. Can you explain how the government arrived at the list of exemptions that are included in the bill? Well,
the exemptions from the abstraction regime largely cover activities which are, firstly, for the most part, non-consumptive of the water abstracted, and activities that confer wider public benefit. For example, Scottish Water's activities in providing drinking water. And it should again point out for the record that Scottish Water's non-core activities wouldn't be exempted from this regime. The generation of electricity by hydropower, irrigation, these are all purposes that are considered to fulfil a social benefit, as well as generally being non-consumptive of the water. So that's the general rule that was applied in deciding on these categories. Obviously, we have the ability to change those categories at any time if we considered that was appropriate, but those are the kind of criteria that were used in coming to that initial list.
What was the reason for choosing the 10 megalitres a day limit?
If I can use a non-technical term, because like you, this is an issue I've learned a lot about in a relatively short space of time. It's a lot of water, the 10 megalitres a day, the threshold. I should also say this only applies to future abstractions, not to current abstractions. We chose 10 megalitres because it represents a significant volume of water. As far as I understand, the vast majority of abstractions in Scotland at present fall beneath that threshold. So this is not a regime that is likely to have a massive impact on people who use water. But I guess it comes back to the original purpose of this. It's about recognising the value of water and recognising our obligations to sustainably safeguard that resource and the value of that resource for the future. And therefore it's right that the level is set at a fairly high threshold because it's big abstractions, I suppose, that would be more likely to jeopardise that sustainable safeguarding. Again, a bit like the list of organisations, the threshold can be changed if there are reasons going forward for that to be changed, and the regulations that we would have to introduce there would be subject to affirmative procedure. So, you know, that would be subject to that level of parliamentary scrutiny.
Finally, the new abstraction regime has the potential to impose additional costs on businesses. Can you, at this stage, give us some indication of what the possible scale of charges might be for the new regime?
We haven't yet. That would be set out in the regulations that we would be required to introduce. Again, and obviously we would consult properly and listen to stakeholder views on that before coming to any decisions there. But I would repeat the point I made earlier on. We don't expect many people to be affected by the abstraction regime. I mean, I've just been told here the estimate is that over the next decade, we might look at 5 to 10 applications over a 10-year period. So this is not something that is going to put significant burdens on people who are using water.
Good. Thank you.
Right. Jim, you want to move on to Scottish Water's functions?
Yes, thank you, Convener. We've heard earlier from witnesses concerns that they have that Scottish Water Horizons may be at a competitive advantage compared to its competitors, commercial rivals, if you like, due to access to Scottish Government finance and to Scottish Water land and facilities. Now, when asked about that, Scottish Water were very clear that that wasn't the case, but I just wanted to give you the opportunity to put on the record your own view and to give an assurance that that is not happening.
I mean, I'm very clear that that is both that it shouldn't be the case and that secondly that it's not the case. I mean, Scottish Water's non-core activities operate fairly, they operate on a level playing field. I mean, just as one example of that, lending to business stream is at a commercial rate determined by the economic regulator, and any future lending to any Scottish Water subsidiary would also be at a commercial rate, and that's very important for state aid reasons, which I know is something else that's been mentioned to the committee. We would expect Scottish Water to earn a fair economic return on all of the non-core commercial activities that it's engaged in. So I really don't believe that it's able to operate at an unfair advantage, and nor should it be the case.
Okay, thank you for that. Can I ask you more broadly about the assessment and management of benefit and risk by ministers and officials in terms of the exercise of Scottish Water's non-core functions? You yourself this morning pointed to the fact that profits could potentially be used from the non-core business to support core services and possibly even to reduce customers' bills. So I'm interested in that. I'm also interested in the other side of the coin, which is that there is potential for there to be commercial losses in terms of the non-core services, and how would government cope with that? So assessment and management of benefit and risk.
Well, I mean, the first part of the question, I can't really say much more than I said earlier on. It's a possibility in the future, but it would be subject to ministerial decision-making in the future as to whether non-core profits could, be used for the benefit of consumers of core services. In terms of the other way round, I mean, the bill itself, as well as the regulatory regime for Scottish Water, is very, very clear about the protection of the core services, and nothing about the non-core part of Scottish Water's business should be subsidised by customers paying for water and sewage services. And I think you heard from the Water Industry Commission about how they approach the regulation function to ensure that transparency and that assurance is there. They also clearly set charges at the lowest reasonable level for customers, taking account all of the investment requirements of Scottish Water and government lending, etc. Obviously, Scottish Water, in terms of any subsidiary, like Horizons, for example, have to take these decisions as any organisation like that would be, to make sure they're operating on a sustainable way. In a sustainable way, the function of government is to ensure that the law is designed in a way and the regulatory system works in a way to ensure the protection of the consumers of the core services.
Right, so any loss, commercial loss for a non-core project, that is something that Scottish Water Horizons would have to take the hit on, and that would not impact.
Yes, it would not impact on the core Scottish Water business.
Okay, that's helpful. Just finally, you said a moment ago that any lending directly to Scottish Water subsidiaries would be at a commercial rate. Can you envisage a situation where the lending to Scottish Water subsidiaries could have an impact on the total funding available to Scottish Water?
Well, the way the bill is drafted, as you will have seen, that all lending has to be within limits set in budgets. So there is an upper limit that will apply year on year. I think the priorities in terms of government's approach to this, I can't sit here and sort of look years ahead and say what the divide and the division between these different aspects of the overall business would be. But going back to your earlier question, the priority and the responsibility of government is to make sure that the core business is taking priority, and that any decisions we are making around lending or other funding to Scottish Water reflects that priority we give to the core business.
Okay, I think we'll leave it there.
Okay, Gordon?
I want to move on to part 4 of the bill on raw water quality. The Centre for Water Law argues that SEPA, rather than Scottish Water, would be a better organisation to take on the new powers regarding raw water quality, as they already are involved in raw water quality monitoring. Can you explain why you consider Scottish Water to be the appropriate organisation to take on these new powers?
I think there is an overlap in the roles, and it's not exactly the same answer, but it will touch on the answer I gave earlier on to, I think, no, it was to Alec Johnson about why abstraction regime that's in this bill as opposed to just relying on the CAR process. And it comes back to the difference between the kind of narrow focus of the environment versus the broader focus that we're seeking that Scottish Water is able to take through the provisions in this bill. I mean, SEPA's focus is to protect the environment. It's a very important focus, whereas Scottish Water's concern in terms of these provisions in the bill is the raw water that will be treated and put into the distribution network. So yes, there will be an overlap of the roles, but I think it's right and proper that it's Scottish Water that has the ability to find out what it is that might be undermining the raw water quality, so that it can then decide what the most effective solution to that is, and find that solution in a way that benefits customers. So I'm quite clear that that's an appropriate function for Scottish Water, but equally clear that it's a function Scottish Water has to deliver in partnership with other agencies, chief amongst them perhaps SEPA.
You've suggested there's an overlap between SEPA and Scottish Water with the water monitoring network, but there's been a suggestion by the Centre for Water Law that the SEPA existing network is being reduced. Do you see that? I mean, how do you foresee that happening, going on in the future?
I think it's important that all of the agencies that are working in this area now, that will be Scottish Water, SEPA organisations like RSPB, for example, farmers, people who have a part to play in this and a big interest in making sure this is done properly, continue to work together in a joined up and complementary way. And I think there is opportunities, not specifically in this bill, but through what we're doing in this bill, not to get in the way of that kind of partnership working, but actually to make sure it works even better than it perhaps does already.
Yeah. Well, on the subject of partnership working, Scottish Water indicated in the evidence that they already work in partnership with other statutory bodies and land managers to protect raw water quality. Can you explain what the provisions in Part 4 provide that cannot be achieved on a voluntary basis?
Well, I think you would hope, and I think Scottish Water made this point when they were here, you would hope that it would continue to operate on a voluntary basis, and the powers that are being given in this part of the bill would only require to be used in extremis and very rare circumstances. Mm-hmm. But we all know, that we operate in a real life situation, and sometimes these voluntary partnerships don't work as effectively as you would want them to. Mm-hmm. And in those circumstances, I think it is important, given the importance of the quality of raw water, that Scottish Water have the power to do what's envisaged in the bill. So it's not intended that these powers will become the default way of operation here. They will be used sparingly as a last resort. The partnership approach will continue to be the preferred approach, but these just give the backstop powers that I think it's appropriate for Scottish Water to have.
In relation to that new power of entry and inspection, the UK Environmental Law Association was concerned that the term premises was unclear and asked whether it included land and buildings or just buildings. Can you provide a clear definition of premises?
I think it doesn't include houses. That's the easy bit of the answer. It's envisaged, I think, that it includes land and buildings, but I'm happy, given that concern has been made about potential lack of clarity in the bill, that we take that away and look at whether we need to make any changes at stage 2, just to put that beyond any doubt.
Right, okay. And finally, the committee's heard concerns that allowing Scottish Water to enter into agreements with owners or occupiers of land to undertake works to prevent the deterioration of water quality may result in land managers being subsidised to comply with the law. In fact, the Scotch Whisky Association in written evidence asked for safeguards to be put in place to ensure that landowners are not being paid to comply with the law, e.g. the construction of slurry storage. What assurances can you give that such a situation will not arise?
Well, it's certainly not the intention to do that, and as I've said in relation to previous questions, I'm happy to look to see whether we need to do more in terms of the face of the bill to clarify that. But, you know, and this will be a point I no doubt make in terms of the section on the sewerage network. It is not the intention here to remove the responsibility of private owners, either of land or, you know, in later sections of septic tanks. It's very much about encouraging people who are in that ownership position to take responsibility and to fulfil their responsibilities. So that is certainly not the intention of the bill.
Okay, thanks.
If we move on to non-domestic services, Adam.
Yes, we haven't had much by way of comment on Part 5 of the bill, but Consumer Focus Scotland had concerns about the establishment of a system of deemed contracts, and particularly highlighted concerns about experiences with such systems in the energy industry. What assurances can you give us that this won't arise in the water industry?
I mean, I read the evidence that Consumer Focus Scotland had given, and I'd certainly be quite keen to just understand a bit more about what lies behind the concerns they have, as I'm sure the Water Industry Commission would be as well. I think this is a common sense provision in this bill, and I think it's an important provision. I've had constituency experience, and I'm sure others around the table have had, of the problems that exist when there is no clarity in place about the contract between who supplies the water and who is benefiting from the supply of that water. And these circumstances can arise regularly if water providers are changing. So I think this is a common sense proposal to put in place the deemed arrangements if there is no actual arrangement that exists. And the Water Industry Commission obviously has a part to play in terms of the detail of that scheme. But, you know, I would be happy to have a discussion with Consumer Focus Scotland to make sure that we fully understand the concerns that they've got and are taking whatever steps are necessary for the remainder of the bill, or in the later state after the bill's passed, and in the work that has to be done then to introduce this, to make sure those concerns are taken account of.
Thanks. I've had my own difficulties with my constituency office in this regard. However, we won't go into that. Are you confident that proposals in Part 5 will prevent the situation of bad payers that's currently caused when new occupiers fail to inform the licence provider when they have entered the property? I'm
not sure any legislative system will completely deal in any area where people get billed and are required to pay, will deal with every instance of bad payers. There will always be a small number of people who don't pay or don't pay on time and who create issues in that way. What it will do is, by putting the onus on the landlord to notify the licensed provider when there's a change of occupancy, it will make it harder for people to hide behind a lack of knowledge about who should be paying and who they should be paying to, just by the fact that information hasn't been made clear. So I think it will help. Whether it will completely solve that problem, I think, is another question.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Margaret, you want to ask some questions about the sewerage network?
Yes, regarding the sewage network, the proposals relating to passing pollutants and fat into the sewer network were actually universally supported by witnesses. However, several stakeholders have recommended that the list of trade premises to be inspected by Scottish Water and SEPA could be expanded to include bodies such as schools and hospitals. Would this be something that could be revised in the bill?
It's certainly possible to revise it. I mean, I'm happy. I'm not going to today give a commitment to expanding that list, because I think there has to be some careful consideration given to the types of organisations and bodies that it's appropriate to have in this bill. But I'm happy to consider any specific suggestions that have been made as we go through the next part of the process.
Okay, thank you. And moving on to septic tanks, these did actually raise some issues. The provision relating to the maintenance and repair of the septic tanks could have implications for less well-off people connected to the communal septic tanks. Such people may actually have to pay for the repairs that they cannot afford. Can you explain how people will be protected from being landed with the substantial bills for the septic tank repairs?
Well, the bill is not changing. You know, it's not giving obligations to people who don't already have them. What it is doing is making it easier for repairs or maintenance of a septic tank to go ahead, even where somebody who has part ownership is not prepared to sign up. It's a bit like the way individuals living in a tenement are responsible for the maintenance of their property. So it's not, you know, nobody who currently doesn't have a responsibility for the maintenance of a septic tank is being given that responsibility by this bill. It's simply making it easier to get repairs done, notwithstanding the fact that not everybody is signing up in advance. And I think again it's a common sense proposal.
Yeah. Last time when we had witnesses, I think what I'm actually also trying to say is that the concern could be that you could have 4 households sharing the same tank and it's broken and only one person is prepared to actually get the repair done. It would then be up to that individual to actually get the repair done, pay for it, and if the other 3 owners don't agree to pay, then they would actually have to take them to court and then obviously incur extra court costs to recoup the money. So that's a concern as well. Could you take these things into consideration?
Sure, but in a sense that's what the bill is trying to do, to enable one owner to comply with their statutory duties by getting repairs or maintenance done even where co-owners are not prepared to do that. And yes, that creates the scenario you've talked about there, but the only alternative to that is the current situation where, because not all owners or not every owner will sign up in advance, the repair can't be done. And that's the problem in the current system. So I would repeat again, I think this is a really important point to stress. There is nobody who will acquire responsibilities and obligations for the maintenance of septic tanks by virtue of this bill that doesn't already have those obligations. It is simply putting in place a system that allows repairs to be done by one or more owners, even where others are standing in the way, and yes, then recover that cost. But I think that's a better position to be in than having a lot of septic tanks that can't be properly maintained and repaired because we've got a, you know, everybody signs up or nobody signs up position like we have just now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and finally, if we look at water shortage orders, Cabinet Secretary, how often do you expect water shortage orders to be used? And do you see that there's might be increasing use in the future, given the growing number of extreme weather conditions that we have?
I'm not sure my ability to see into the future is quite as well developed as that. I mean, in serious answer to the question, I would hope and envisage that these are things that would be used very rarely. But, you know, you can't, you know, if it was the case that we never, ever thought these kind of orders would have to be used, there'd be no point having statutory provision for them. So they will be used sparingly and rarely, and obviously, as is set out in the bill, the case has to be made and the requirements set out in the bill have to be met. So it's a very robust process that we are setting out. I mean, the important point here, of course, is that we're removing the term drought from here, recognising the fact that there are things other than drought that can potentially cause a water shortage. So it's about bringing the language up to date and making sure there is a process laid down in statute that is transparent and easy for people to understand.
And there's been a suggestion there might be serious implication for vulnerable groups and some businesses dependent on water. What protection do you think the bill offers to these groups?
Well, it would be for Scottish Water, if such an order was to be introduced, would, you know, have obligations to make sure that vulnerable people were being catered for, as they, you know, do just now if there are water shortages in any particular area. So I think the current operation of Scottish Water, I think, covers that point. But it, as I've said in other aspects of consideration, you know, I'm happy to look at the particular drafting of the bill to see if there is anything that could make that point clearer than it is. I don't know if you want to point to anything in particular.
Yeah, it's going to be consultation built into it?
Yeah, I mean,
there's a full consultation process.
We're going to have a consultation through this as well, so that's another opportunity to look at that point.
And businesses in particular?
In terms of?
Well, you know, for example, I think the Scotch Whisky Association, who I recognise in the audience today, might have some concerns about water shortage orders.
We'd be happy to talk to the Scottish Whisky Association about that, and no doubt abstractions as well, going back in the agenda, as well as any particular concerns they have about the use of water shortage orders and the need to make sure that if these orders are being used, then the vulnerabilities and interests of individuals and businesses are properly being catered for.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have a final question they might want to ask on this stage one of this bill? Okay, thank you very much. That concludes our evidence at stage one of the Water Resources Scotland Bill, and we'll be considering the draft report at a future meeting in the very near future. Can I thank Cabinet Secretary and officials for their evidence this morning. And that's you finished. Thank you very much. Briefly suspend to allow you to leave the room. We can crack on then. Agenda item 3, subordinate legislation. The committee had been due to take evidence on the Housing Scotland Act 2001, assistance to registered social landlords and other persons, grants, amendments, regulations 2012, following consideration of the instrument at its meeting on the 31st of October. However, the Scottish Government has since notified the committee of its intention to formally revoke the instrument. It is likely that the Scottish Government will make a further set of regulations in the near future to replace these regulations. The committee is therefore invited to note this position and take no further action in relation to this instrument.
Negative procedure.
Okay, anyone else got anything to say on that? No? Agenda item 4 is appointment of the European Union reporter. On the 9th of December 2010, the Parliament agreed to introduce a Parliament-wide scheme for European Union engagement and scrutiny, including the introduction of an early warning system for EU legislative proposals was introduced, requiring subject committees to be responsible for appointing EU reporters and for scrutinising EU proposals within their area. Following Aileen MacLeod's move from the committee, it is necessary for us to appoint a new reporter, and I refer members to paper 6. At the committee's previous meeting, 2 members expressed an interest in the role, and it was agreed to defer the decision until today. So can I invite nominations from members? Okay, I have a nomination for Jim Eadie. Do we need seconders or just nominations? Okay, no seconders. Any other
nominate Margaret McCulloch.
I have a nomination for Margaret. So we have 2 nominations, and it's necessary to move to a vote. Yeah?
I mean, I think this is obviously a difficult decision because both people are very able and competent and well-qualified people for the post, and it's an enviable position to have an election on such a matter. I mean, the only thing I would observe is, apart from being very well aware of my colleague Margaret McCulloch's great competence and interest in this area, is that the last 2 reporters have been from the governing party, and I do think, you know, given the stated wish of the SNP to govern as a minority party, I think this is a relevant consideration as people cast their votes today.
Okay, does anyone else want to make any observations?
observation I'd make is that it's good to have some competition for a change, because we generally had to twist the arm of somebody to come forward in this area.
Can I just make a wee comment as well on my behalf as well? I think also one of the reasons that I felt I should put myself forward as well was because it would give a sort of better balance on the committee. At the moment, we've got yourself, Maureen, who is a convener, who's part of the SNP government, and we've also got another 3 SNP members as well. So there's myself and Malcolm, and we've got Alec as the Conservative member. So I felt, and also as well, that Alec Salmon, the First Minister, actually says that he would operate the government as a minority government, and I was hoping that in this case this would prove to be the case.
Okay. It's been the role of the European rapporteur or reporter. Obviously, I endorsed Malcolm's earlier comments about the suitability, capability and expertise of the 2 candidates. But I'm aware and fully supportive of the increased emphasis that the Parliament has given to scrutiny of EU legislation over the last 2 or 3 years. And clearly EU laws can be of significance to many policy areas which we have responsibility for as MSPs, and that's certainly the case for this committee. I'm thinking specifically of public procurement, but also broadband and state aid, the digital agenda, various transport issues and water, to name but a few. And I think what's interesting is the number of European initiatives and legislation which there is across the range of policy areas, which dovetails with the legislative and policy agenda both of the Parliament and of this committee. So we're seeing initiatives and legislation on public procurement coming from the Parliament at the same time as it is coming from the European institutions, and also in the area of water, which we've just been discussing in depth. We have a water resources bill going through this Parliament at the same time as there are European initiatives. So I think it is very topical, very relevant for this committee, as it is for all the committees of the Parliament. But I just want to emphasise that while I'm a relatively new member of the Parliament and of the committee, I would hope to bring a fresh and inclusive perspective and approach and an open mind to working with colleagues across all of the parties, mindful of the comments that have been made by members about the need to operate in a basis which recognises that this is a parliament of all parties, not just one. So I would hope that would be helpful and offer some reassurance to other committee members that if I was to be successful, that I would seek to meet with other members of the committee across all parties and to work collaboratively with them in taking forward these issues.
Wait.
Finally, just to sort of finish off, based on what Jim actually says about working in partnership, I had been quite happy to work in partnership with Jim for us to share the role, as had initially been agreed. But for whatever reason, Maureen, you decided that wouldn't actually work. So I would just want to back up the fact that I was more than happy to share the role with us both to be the EU reporters.
Well, in terms of that last part first, Margaret, I did check to see whether this was the situation in any other committees, and there are no other committees that have a joint EU reporter, and I think, it's probably rather messy. On what you said previously, I don't think we should conflate the government and the Parliament in terms of the committee structure that's well laid out by the Bureau and initially when Parliament is set up and the committee structure is set up, and the composition here reflects what the Bureau agreed. And in terms of what the government does, in terms of how it approaches legislation, that's different from the Parliament. I regret we're in this situation. Maybe it was my fault that I hadn't noticed that you had a particular interest in European issues up till now. And, we've got a situation now where we've got 2 people interested in the job, and I think we should just go straight to the vote. So, can I invite those members whose preference is for Jim Eadie to undertake the role of European Reporter to raise their hands? And those in favour of Margaret to undertake the role to raise their hands? Yeah, you are allowed. You are allowed to vote. Yeah, you are allowed to vote, as is Margaret is allowed to vote. So I'll run that again. Those in favour of Jim Eadie to undertake the role of European Reporter to raise their hands. Those in favour of Margaret McCulloch to undertake the reporter's role to raise their hands. So that's 4 votes to 3 with no abstentions. So Jim will be our European reporter. That ends the business for today. At the meeting on the 14th of November, we'll hear from Scottish Water and with the Wicks, and we'll consider our first look at the budget. Okay. The budget report, yes, the draft budget report. Okay, I now close this meeting. Thank you very much.